Well, welcome to the Ag Sales Professionals TV. Today, I am joined by a special guest, Kacee Bohle, out of Indiana, who works with Conservis. She's a regional manager for Conservis. So, welcome, Kacee, and how are you today?
Good morning. Doing fine.
Welcome from Western Indiana. For our listeners, if you would just tell us a little bit or share some of your background in agribusiness and your background in farming.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, so I grew up on a farm here in Western Indiana, corn and soybeans. Be fourth generation farm, so that's kind of all I've ever known is agriculture. And I really did not know what I wanted to do when I grew up. You know, we always were on the farm, but really didn't know what that meant for me. And so went to school for agriculture, got a bachelor's degree, and came back to the farm for a couple of years or a couple of months actually, and realized I probably can't do this, can't work for my dad full time, and
Sure.
ended up going to our local John Deere dealership to get some parts one day, and ended up convincing him to give me a job. So that's kind of where it all started.
Excellent. So the lifetime of an ag, and that took you into the parts department, and then from there,
Yeah.
I know you ventured out across the Midwest, and you spent some time in the wonderful state of Missouri, and
Yeah.
then now, where did you end up, or where are you ended up right now? I suppose is a better
Well, I'm
question.
right back at home. Went out to Missouri for a couple of years, and I actually really enjoyed that. That was probably one of the best things for me. It got me out of my comfort zone and really just opened my eyes to different parts of agriculture. Being from a very small town in Indiana, I kind of just know what I know. And I think it's important for folks in agriculture, and especially those who want to go back to the farm, to step out, experience life, experience ag in different aspects, and then be able to bring that, experience and things like that back home to the farm. So we moved back early last year and are working back on the farm. My husband helps my parents, and I'm doing the Conservis thing and just absolutely love it.
Well, I think that's important because my career, I worked with, I did not grow up on a farm, so I didn't have that perspective of leaving the farm and coming back. But I did have a lot of trainees and new employees who were for the first time in their life away from home and got to have that experience that farming in Indiana is different than maybe farming in Missouri and just being on the other side of the fence from the sales process. And so obviously we talk a lot about sales on my particular broadcasts. And so that experience out to Missouri and back, what are some of the insights as you got out there and realized that, this is not the same as life on the farm in Indiana? What were maybe some of the things that, you recommended, hey, for every kid graduating from their local university or their nearby university, take that venture, what would you tell them if they were getting ready to take their first steps away from home after college?
I definitely recommend it. I mean, if you have the opportunity to take an internship or just a short term job out somewhere, go do that and get that experience. For me, it was that big eye opener that farming is different, not only in different states, but I thought that every farm was set up just like my mom and dad's farm.
Yeah,
That there were family farms across the U.S. I thought that's how farming looked. I thought that's what that was. And growing up, that was common. But in the last 10, 15 years, farming has looked different. There's corporate farms, which there always has been, but it's becoming more and more common that those farms are starting to grow, and they're not just your family farm, they're more so a corporate account, if you will. And
absolutely.
so being exposed to different farming in different states and seeing that there are different types of farmers, like that was a huge eye opener for me. It was a good learning experience, and I think that's definitely helped shape how I interact with farmers now in my role at Conservis. So I definitely suggest people to go out, step out of their comfort zones, get educated on what farming looks like and just network and really just start to educate themselves and understand what else is outside of the family farm gate, you know.
That's great. That's great advice. And it's, you know, it's ever more important. You know, there's a great business for being in agribusiness, and not everybody ends up in a sales position, but a lot do that maybe didn't intend to end up in a sales position to begin with. So in your efforts to be in agribusiness, kind of what drew you maybe into the sales position? And you know, you grew up as and I talked about this in a blog recently about being that salesperson that dad didn't like. And so many farm kids, many farm kids have that bias that they don't want to be in sales because it's a bad thing, because their dad, predominantly their dad, did not like the onslaught of salespeople who called on him. So how do you approach that differently, or what mindset do you use when you're out selling, that you know, you're not replaying that dad's message in your head of, you know, this farmer doesn't like me, and so a lot of salespeople struggle with that. So how do you kind of approach the sales process differently from that?
I definitely did not think that I was going to be a salesperson when I grew up. I mean, like I said, I grew up on the farm, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And I thought that I was going to follow in my mom and my grandma's footsteps and be the stay-at-home mom, take care of the kids, make the lunches, take it to the field. And if necessary, I'd step in and work some ground or run the auger cart or something like that if times were getting busy. So I didn't plan on being in sales, and I don't even know if I'm considered a good salesperson. I mean, I don't know what makes you good or bad.
Sure.
But when I started at the parts counter at our local dealership, people did not come to see me because they were just happy and out running around that day. They came to see me because something was broken and they needed me to fix it. You know, I was in the parts department. And so I had to learn real quick how to read someone's body language as soon as they walked in the door. I needed to be able to adjust my tonality on how I talk to them, because usually they're not in a good mood when they come to the parts counter, unless they're just coming to get popcorn and coffee and hang out. But you know, most of the time they're in a rush and they're not happy, and they're there spending money that they didn't plan on spending. And so I really just had to quickly learn how to adapt on the fly. And so I think that was a very good setup for me for where I am now, because I constantly work with farmers, and every single farmer's personality is going to be different. And going back to what I thought farming looked like in general, I thought every farm was the family farm, and I thought every farmer acted just like my mom and dad acted. And I thought every farmer was going to be kind of this hardworking, stubborn, relentless, but had that like teddy bear side, as well, because that's how my dad was. He looked tough and gruff, and he had to do what he had to do to get the job done. But you talk to him just right, and he'll open up, and he'll be kind of sweet. And so that's kind of how I hope every farmer is. So when I go out onto the farm, I think, how would I want someone to treat my dad, and how would I want someone to act towards my mom as well? And I think, I'm sure we'll touch on this here in a little bit, but the women in ag are very important as well. And I think that kind of gives me a little bit of a different approach than most typical salespeople. All growing up, I cannot remember one single female salesperson show up on our farm. And so how I act when I go to the farm, I always try to be professional, but also just keep in mind that, I need to include the wife as well, and not just husband, because they're the ones who are also making the decisions. So I try to have a little bit of a different approach and make sure that I'm, not overstepping boundaries, but keeping everyone involved.
Well, that's good perspective. And yeah, we will. I want to touch on that. Let's talk a little bit about Conservis, because you mentioned about getting out of your comfort zone. You're certainly out of your comfort zone because you cover a large geography. As we discussed previously, you cover 4 states and even stray up at times into the Great White North of Canada. And so obviously farming in Ohio, Indiana might be similar, but as you stretch into Canada and Kentucky and parts of Illinois or in Pennsylvania or wherever else you go to in your journeys, tell us a little bit about Conservis, of what it is and maybe what drew you there and what exactly you do with them.
Yeah, of course. Conservis is an amazing company, and I wish I had known about them a lot sooner. They're based out of Minneapolis, and they're an independent company. And what they do is they provide farmers specifically a farm management system, so where they can. And I used to say we work directly with the farmer and we provide them tools, but honestly, we're working with so many other avenues in agriculture that influence that farmer. So we're working with a lot of their trusted advisors as well, because, they don't always know how to answer something, or they don't always know how to make sense of their data. And so they're bringing in their agronomists, they're bringing in their lenders and their CPAs and whoever else, and trying to make sense of what the information that they have, what does it mean and how do we utilize it? And so Conservis's goal is to collect all of the data from your farm in one spot. So we're integrating with the machines out in the field. We're integrating with their accounting system. We're integrating with anything that they could possibly think of on their farm, any kind of data, bring it into one spot so that way they could put all those puzzle pieces together, rather than maybe your typical farm used to look like, I've got 5 spreadsheets and each spreadsheet meant a different thing. Well, how do we combine those spreadsheets into one and really make sense of it? How do we share that information, et cetera? So Conservis is that farm management platform that is the central hub, brings everything together. If you're going to log into one thing every single day, what could it be? It could be Conservis. That's where everything lies.
Great. So as you look at it, would you call yourself an agronomy? When you say integrating all the data, are they bringing together all their agronomy decisions, or is it financial tools, or is it farm management from bringing in input costs and break-even analysis and that kind of thing? Or what?
Yeah, a little bit of all of it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're more so on the economic side of it than agronomic. There's a lot of really good programs out there that focus on the agronomic part of it. We integrate with those systems and tie in the cost level. So we really want you to be able to understand, when you're out there planting your crop and you're harvesting your crop and you've done all these activities, what's the cost associated to it? And did it make sense for me financially to do that thing? And so Conservis is more so on the economic than the agronomic, if I were to pick a side.
Sure.
But we allow those agronomic pieces to have a deeper insight by tying those costs to it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, I trust me. We used to call it the shoebox accounting method, and maybe you can I'm sure you're familiar with that. And in the grain origination, people would not track their grain sales. They just make sale after sale after sale. And then one day they would bring in this shoebox of all their, receipts and say, here, they dump it on somebody's desk inside of our grain elevator.
Headache.
Figure this out. And where am I at? And how much have I sold? And how much have I made? And, or the methodology that there's money in the checkbook, and if there's money in the checkbook, then I have enough. I made money that year. So
no.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So how do you go in and if you had to say, how do you work with producers and what they do and your involvement specifically?
So for me specifically, I do work directly with the grower, but there's a lot of the times where I've already had relationships built with banks or seed salesmen or the agronomist or whatever it may be. And they may say, we work with this farmer and they're smart, they know how to farm, but there might just be a little bit of complexity, and they're doing that shoebox method where they've got the box full of the receipts. And so they have the information, but what do they do with it? How do they make sense of it? I mean, do they just throw it on their trusted advisor's desk and walk away and hope for the best?
Right.
And so we work with those trusted advisors, and they may say, we've got that farmer who's good at farming, but they need help in this area tracking those elevator receipts, or maybe they need help planning and budgeting and really just honing in on the cost and getting things set up. And or maybe they're needing to have a whole system where everyone in the farm needs to be able to log in and do their part and not affect somebody else's part. Whereas maybe if you had that big old spreadsheet, one person could go in, make an edit, and then affect somebody else's big time. So that's kind of what Conservis does. And so, I work directly with the grower, and I work directly with their trust advisor as well. And so it just really, it depends. And we're not going to be a fit for every farmer, but the farmers that it does make sense for, it's changed their lives dramatically because they're doing what they want to do, which is farm, not record keep. And so we're helping eliminate some of the manual entry and the time spent trying to plug all that stuff back into the computer. Where they're actually focusing on what they need to do, which is farm.
Absolutely. That's great. So talk about maybe what are some of your more rewarding, in sales, you have you have high moments and low moments.
Yeah.
So if you had to say, hey, these are some of the more rewarding, it's always interesting, I think, for us as salespeople to understand, what somebody else finds as a rewarding moment, because there are lots of level moments and there are lots of low moments, but maybe talk about some of your highlights of, hey, these are the most rewarding moments in a sales career.
To me, I always want to be able to help the farmer. And if it's me bringing Conservis onto the farm and solving those types of problems where, we've given them time back to spend with their family, or we've helped make their lives more organized, things like that, that's always rewarding. But honestly, being able to see your typical traditional farmer that's just hard as a rock, they're, stone cold, and being able to kind of just melt them a little bit and help them understand, like, not every salesperson is out to get you. Not every company is going to try to take advantage of you. And when I break that point with them and they're like, oh, you are actually here for my best interest. You actually care. You actually understand what we're going through. You're the farmer's daughter and a farmer's wife, and you get what it's like in our industry. Sure. Those moments are so rewarding to me that it's like, okay, somebody actually sees me for who I am, not just that salesperson. And so that's pretty rewarding. There's a lot of lows, obviously.
Yeah. Well, instead of talking about maybe the lows, how do you get through? Maybe a better question for you would be, obviously the lows are a customer quits you or distrusts you, because what you talked a lot about as far as being the high is trust. They've built that. You drive onto the farm and they look at you're one more salesperson trying to call on them. Yeah. And then you break through that and you get through the other side where they realize you're not just trying to make a commission, you're trying to help them and match a product, obviously, to do that. But how do you maybe get through? What perspectives do you use internally within your head to give you strength to get through that moment when it's a little bit of a low?
Well, I always have to remember that I could have just shown up on a bad day, and so I try not to take it personally. But honestly, when I feel really hard, and I'm very empathetic to every single farmer because I know what they're going through, and I know that it's not my fault that they're having a bad day. Maybe it is. I don't know. I did drive into somebody's yard one time and left a big rut, so maybe that was my fault. I have to just remember that they're facing a lot of struggles right now with the industry, with markets, and so it's not always I'm the one that they're letting it out on, so I have to remember that. But my strategy is take a step back, start asking appropriate questions if it's necessary or if it's applicable, and just really dive into, like, what is the problem? Is it something I can solve? Did I show up and you're frustrated because your crew's running around and no one knows what they're doing? Okay, well, let's talk about maybe getting you a system with work orders where you can assign somebody a task. And so I try not to just give up too easily and say, okay, you're in a bad mood, I'll stop by some other time. I'm like, well, are you in a bad mood because there's something on the farm that I could help with?
Yeah.
Maybe I can't, maybe I can. And so let's talk that through and let's really just figure out, maybe I did show up on the right day and I'm really seeing that you are frustrated, and maybe it was because you need something like us and it just happened to be a coincidence that I'm on your farm. So let's talk through those strategies and just really hone in on what the problem is. And so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Well, it's great. And I think the perspective you share about, it's not about you typically, unless there's something in particular that your company has done or you have done. And odds are that that's probably not likely, that you've just kind of caught a moment in time and they're busy and they're trying to, obviously they have plenty of challenges just as any company does. So you brought up a great point previously, and I want to get to that. You've been involved in Women in Ag, which is an association that I'm going to let you talk about. But this is an interesting point. You mentioned growing up on a farm that you can't remember, a time when a woman called on the farm to sell your family any products. And that has obviously changed over the last 20, 25 years. I mentioned to you when we talked previously, I started out and there was one sales lady amongst 25, 30 sales guys, and it was a unique type of thing. Over the course of my career, of course, that was different. We probably were 50-50 by the time I ended my career with my previous company. And today's environment, I would imagine it's about that ratio. So tell us a little bit about what Women in Ag is, what drew you into it, and let's explore a little bit about that environment. And then you mentioned also the farmer's wife's involvement, because this is important as you go in to sell, that this bias about who's running the farm and who's actually running the books. And I always talk about it's usually a joint effort. If you don't know it, it's usually a joint effort. And sometimes it's actually run more by the spouse than it is maybe by the person that drives the tractor in that. So tell us a little bit about Women in Ag and your involvement.
So when I moved back to Indiana, I was trying to build up my network and really just start to be involved and get to know the people to know in Indiana. And so I joined this Women in Agribusiness group, and they had meetups in Indianapolis. I want to say it was quarterly. And so I started to go to those and met a lot of really good women in ag, and they ranged from people who were in college that were internships to folks in sales positions like me, all the way up to CEOs and very high professional women in agriculture. So we all attended these meetups, and it was basically just a networking event and some wine, things like that. And so I started to attend a few more of those, started to go to some of the local events through Purdue, had Women in Ag events as well. And the ACI, Agriculture Council of Indiana, they had some Women in Ag events as well. And so when I refer to Women in Ag, I just mean like the idea of women in agriculture. And so yes, there is an organization, the Women in Agribusiness. But basically, I just started to attend those things, and I realized that there are professional women in agriculture that aren't just the women that were the farmer's daughter or just the farmer's wife that married into it. There's actually successful women in agriculture. And so that to me is pretty huge, because it helps open my eyes to you can be a professional when you go to the farm. You don't have to act like every other farmer's daughter when you go and talk to a farmer, but then also helps you talk professionally to their wives, who, like you said, are usually probably going to be the decision makers and one of the biggest influences on where the farm goes. Because if they are doing the bookkeeping and they are doing the ones who are all the paperwork, they are the ones who are going to be in our system, Conservis, all the time, because they're the ones who are entering in that stuff and maintaining it. And so to be able to have relationships built with those farmers' wives or whoever is on the farm that's a woman, it's important to understand that dynamic and that respect that's necessary. And so I've taken a lot of different classes, met a lot of different women who, like I said, were in different roles, and it's been pretty good. And so I encourage anyone who is a female that's working in agriculture that doesn't really know their place, whether it's like, am I allowed to step outside of the farm and leave home and do something professional and on my own that's still ag-related and still help the farmer at the end of the day, which is what I did. I still participate on our farm, but obviously it didn't work out for me to stay home. And so there are opportunities for women, and I think it's great to have that support system, because it's like, I'm not this gung-ho, like, want to be in your face feminist. I just want to be a woman in ag,
Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed being a part of those. Yeah.
No, that's great. I guess my question would be, and I'm a Gen X, so I'm halfway between a boomer and a millennial. I'm kind of with the lost generation. So I grew up in an era where that didn't predominantly, they were not involved in those kind of jobs, and then moved into a career towards the end where it was 50-50%. And today it's obviously in some cases 50-50, in some cases more than that. But if you had to give advice, and nobody said, hey, Greg, as a sales manager, here's what you should do, or here's some advice for you now I had an HR department that would tell me if I did something wrong, but I didn't. Those are obvious, people know better than to do, those things where somebody does something wrong, they knew better. They just didn't abide by the laws. But for outside of that, for managing, a female sales force, or managing a workforce, male, women, what you do, you go farm to farm, or some of the people, the listeners out here, go agribusiness to agribusiness. What advice would you give to a manager, a sales manager, or a manager at all, a male manager, in regards to advice about managing a women in ag sales force or workforce? Anything in particular that you would say, hey, here's what I would particularly want to tell someone that's not aware of what's what in this world out here. So
that one's kind of tricky for me, because since I've only always worked in agriculture, I've had one female boss in ag, and I get along better with males because I know how they act. There's less drama, there's less emotion.
Sure.
And so to me, it was always easier to work with a male boss, just because it was cut to the chase. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. And you move on.
Sure.
So I think I probably, I would say my advice to a male boss is just know that what you're going to do when you go out to the farm is not going to be the same tactics that I'm going to do when I go to the farm. But when a male goes out to the farm, they're able to maybe point at the deer head in the shop, or point to the tractor and know that they've souped it up. And there are some females who can do that. I'm not one of them. I'm going to take a remark about the cute little dog you've got sitting on the shop floor, or ask about the kids that are running around. So, that's me personally. That's not going to work for every female. But just know, like, the tactics that you have are going to be a little bit different than the tactics that I have, and that the approaches and maybe the conversations are going to be a little bit different. So just be conscious of that. Obviously there are some personal things that I would give advice to that I won't get too deep into here today. But what I do want to mention is that if there is a female boss that is managing, someone like me who's out in the field, just realize, you don't have to be tough and rough and cold-hearted to be in sales. You can have a warm heart. You can go out there and have empathy. And so I just think that in the women in ag world or mindset, it's a weird box that we get put into. It's either you have to act like a male, get the job done, or you're not cut out for it. And so there's a weird place where it's like, I can be feminine and I can have emotions and still get my job done and still be good at it and still work with farmers who are rough and tough. So just be open-minded, I guess, is my biggest piece of advice.
Well, I think that's really good advice, and both to what you're giving advice to is not only a manager, but also to other salespeople, other female salespeople. And I was very fortunate. I had the 50% of my sales force that was women and men. So those 50% that were very, and they were all ranges of tough. I came off of a farm. I know what it's like, and I want to be. I'm not saying they want to be like a man, and they were tough, business driven, so to speak. And then the ones that were not that way. And so, but I would say they were all successful in that they were trustworthy in being genuine. They were who they were.
Exactly.
They weren't trying to be somebody else. Like if they were not tough and trying to act tough, that just doesn't come across as genuine. And it would typically, it usually resulted in less sales. And it took longer to build that trust because that's not who you really are. So maybe, I think what you're kind of coming through with is be who you are. And if you're driven towards results and you're dealing with, hey, let's solve your problems on the farm. I'm going to talk about, the family and the relationships on the farm and some of the things that are going on with you and arguing with your brother over who gets to farm which piece of ground and how to split, the grain splits versus the deer and the tractor and all that stuff. And if you look at it, all of that stuff is, outside of the realm of maybe what you're doing that day, as far as helping them with your particular product and service.
Right.
So I think there's different ways to approach that, and I absolutely think you get, whether you want to or not, when somebody comes out to the farm as a man or woman, there's advantages and disadvantages. It's getting more common, but in the years ago, this is an uncommon thing. So it was easier to get an appointment, I felt, because it was something that was different.
Right.
You still had to deliver once you got the appointment. You couldn't just get the appointment because you're different and then not deliver on it. So I think that's one of the aspects of it. But it was also, you still have the bias of the old, the old traditional thought process of, a guy might have more understanding of some part of the business than women in ag. But
and that's a real issue that people don't maybe realize still happens. As soon as I pull up on the farm and I walk out of the truck and they see that I'm a female, either they say, "Oh, what's she doing out here?" or they say, "What's she doing out here?" You know what I mean? There's two different tones with that. Either I'm out there and not knowing what I'm doing because I'm a female, or I'm out there and I have wrong intentions or something like that. I mean, that stuff's real still. And so when a few years back, when I was trying to figure out how to be a better salesperson, all of the literature and books that I read, and, I took a look at your book, it's like there are seasons to it, in agriculture. So you can't just automatically know what sales is, and none of it's driven and none of it talks about remarks that women will get on the farm. And I'm not saying every farmer has a dirty mind, but they exist still. And how a female reacts to it, you have to have thick skin, but you also have to understand, like, that's part of it. But it's not, you don't have to tolerate it. So, I mean, that's stuff people don't talk about, that you can't find that in books and sales. This is how to be a salesperson or how to be a salesperson in agriculture. They don't talk about that kind of stuff. And so that could be a whole other podcast in itself, probably.
Absolutely. No, it is. And it is, safety, security, that whole aspect. As a manager, I always had to do, you had to talk about that. What's expected, and security of the person that's out there, and it happens, and violence happens, and luckily I was never around any of that it was involved in any of that, but I'm sure there was opportunities for that to happen, and luckily the people that I worked with avoided that, or got out of it, or didn't have it, or didn't tell me. I hope that didn't happen. But I appreciate that and that involvement, because that is an aspect that we're more and more involved with. And it's been great to spend some time with you today. If someone would want to reach out to you or to the organization and learn more about, I know you're involved in social media with Twitter and I'm sure, you know, Conservis is involved in Facebook and Pinterest and every other platform that's out there. Where would you direct people to look at what it is that you're involved with?
Yeah, we are on all social media platforms, Conservis is. And so if somebody was interested in learning more about our farm management software, they could go to our website, conservis.ag, and fill out, you know, their inquiry there, or they could call our phone number, which is 612-424-6644. But if somebody wanted to reach out to me, whether just as a peer, as a woman in ag, or to just understand what I do in my region, so covering the Eastern Corn Belt, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and like we said, a little bit of Canada if they end up reaching out, which they have some cool crops. But I can be found on Twitter at Conservis Kacee, or anybody could send me an email to kbohle@conservis.ag. So anybody can reach out to me at any time. Like I said, I always like to be a resource for farmers, for women in agriculture, if they need someone to talk to just in the industry, or if they wanted to chat about our farm management software, I would love to do that as well.
That's great, Kacee Bohle. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for joining Ag Sales Professionals TV on your journey to being the best salesperson or sales manager you can possibly be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate it.
Great.